The waitress didn't panic during the robbery, and the Korean Mafia boss watching from the corner recognized her face instantly. Rain hammered the windows like fists demanding entry. The diner was a graveyard of breakfast shifts. A nurse in scrubs hunched over black coffee in booth 2. An elderly woman with a walker parked beside her. 2 teenagers sharing one order of pancakes they'd been nursing for an hour. Pamela Thomas stood behind the counter, wiping down the coffee station, when the door banged open, and a man in a black ski mask walked in holding a gun. Everyone dropped. The nurse threw herself sideways. The teenagers went under the table so fast one left her phone spinning on the formica. The elderly woman made a sound like all the air had been punched from her lungs. Pamela didn't move. She stood with the rag still in her hand and looked at the gunman the way you look at a storm when you've already decided not to run. No gasp, no prayer, no raising of hands, just a slow, deliberate breath and a voice so calm it made the gun feel like the wrong tool for the job. "You picked the wrong diner," she said, "and the wrong morning." In the far corner booth, a man in a charcoal suit lowered his teacup without sound. His hand stayed steady. His face stayed blank, but something behind his eyes cracked open like ice over deep water. Sun Tiang hadn't flinched, not because of the weapon, because he knew that face. Quick pause here. If you're watching this from your bedroom at 2 a.m. or your lunch break in some city I've never heard of, drop a comment and let me know where you are. Hit the like button if you think some people are built different. And subscribe, because this story is about a woman who doesn't break. The robber's hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. Not the barrel, the hand. The way his fingers kept adjusting the grip like he couldn't find the right way to hold destruction. The gun wobbled left, drifted right, settled back on center like a compass that didn't know which way was north. He was young. She could tell by his build, by the brand new sneakers, by the way his breath came too fast through the mask. He'd probably been packing outside for 20 minutes convincing himself this was the answer. Pamela didn't move from behind the counter. She didn't put her hands up. She didn't drop like the couple in booth 4 who were clutching each other on the linoleum, or the elderly woman by the door who had knocked her purse over trying to get small. The other waitress, Vanessa, had screamed once and bolted through the kitchen doors so hard she left a tray of silverware clattering across the floor. Pamela just stood there, rag still in hand, watching. "Open the register," the robber said. His voice split on the second word. He aimed the gun at her forehead, and she looked at it the way she'd look at a water stain on the ceiling. Something requiring attention, not something that changed the architecture of her morning. "You picked the wrong place," she said, "and the wrong woman." The robber blinked behind the mask. He hadn't expected language. He'd expected the holy trinity of fear, silence, screaming, or begging. Pamela offered none of them. She offered a gaze that felt heavier than the weapon and a voice that made the fluorescent lights above her seem too loud. "I said open it." He stepped closer. The gun was 18 inches from her face now. His breathing was ragged and wet through the fabric. Pamela tilted her head slightly, almost curious. "The register has maybe 180 in it. You walked in here with a weapon for $180 on a Tuesday before noon." She paused. "You don't want to do this." It wasn't kindness. It wasn't pity. It was a fact delivered with the flat certainty of a woman who had watched enough bad choices unfold to recognize the shape of one before it finished forming. She said it the way someone says the floor is wet, without feeling, without agenda, just truth. In the corner booth, Sun Tiang hadn't moved. His 2 men seated across from him had tensed the moment the door opened. One reached toward his jacket. Tiang raised a hand without looking. A single gesture. Wait. His men went still. Tiang's eyes were locked on the woman behind the counter. Not on the robber. Not on the weapon. On her. On the way her spine stayed straight while every other spine in the room had curved into survival mode. On the way her breathing stayed even while everyone else had forgotten how to breathe. And then she spoke again, something low, something aimed at the kid with the gun that Tiang couldn't fully hear, and his hand froze halfway to his tea. That voice? The diner compressed. The rain on the glass became white noise. The fluorescent buzz overhead became the only sound that mattered. Everything in the room reduced to a single point, the sound of a woman's voice he hadn't heard in 5 years, A voice that had no business being in this diner on this morning. A voice he had carried in his chest like a scar no one else could see. The robber backed toward the door. Whatever Pamela said in that last quiet sentence, the one Tiang couldn't catch, it landed. The kid's arm dropped. He turned and shoved through the door and vanished into the rain like he'd never been there at all. Sirens climbed in the distance. Someone in booth 4 was sobbing. The elderly woman was still on the floor clutching her walker. Pamela pulled a fresh rag from under the counter and wiped down the space where the old woman's purse had spilled. She refilled Vanessa's abandoned coffee mug. She picked up the silverware tray and set it back on the counter and clicked her pen like a robbery was just weather. Something that blew through and didn't leave a mark. Tiang stood. His men stood with him. He left bills on the table, enough to cover 15 meals, and walked toward the door without a word. He didn't speak to her. He didn't approach the counter. He didn't ask her name. But he sat in the back of his car in the rain for 30 minutes, staring at the diner through the water streaming down the windshield, and for the first time in 5 years, the face he saw every time he closed his eyes had a location. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. But before the robbery was even a memory, before the sirens turned into cop cars and the cop cars turned into questions, the video was already uploading. Someone's phone. Booth 2, maybe booth 4, it didn't matter. By the time Pamela clocked out that night, 2 million people had watched her refuse to be afraid, and by the next morning, the diner owner would make sure she paid for it. The video went viral while Pamela was sleeping. She woke up to 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and a text from Vanessa that just said, "Check Twitter." Pamela didn't have Twitter. She had a phone that made calls and a data plan she paid for in cash every month because contracts felt like promises she couldn't afford to keep. She ignored the calls and got dressed for her shift. The rain from yesterday had stopped, but the city still smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. Pamela walked the 4 blocks to the diner with her hood up and her hands in her pockets, the same route she'd walked for 3 years, past the bodega with the crooked awning and the laundromat where the owner's cat slept in the window. Nothing had changed. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before. She was wrong. The diner parking lot was full, not breakfast rush full, news van full. 2 local stations had set up cameras near the entrance. A reporter in a red blazer was doing a stand-up in front of the building, gesturing toward the door like it was a landmark. Pamela stopped at the edge of the lot and pulled her hood lower. A man with a microphone spotted her. "Excuse me, do you work here? Were you inside during the robbery?" Pamela walked past him without answering. She pushed through the diner door and the bell chimed the same way it always did, but the sound felt wrong now, too loud, like it was announcing her instead of just marking her arrival. Inside, the diner was chaos. Every booth was full. People she'd never seen before crowded the counter, phones out, filming. The nurse from yesterday was back, sitting in the same booth, talking to someone off camera. The teenagers were gone, but 3 new teenagers had taken their place, reenacting the robbery for their phones. Vanessa was behind the counter looking like she hadn't slept, refilling the same coffee cup over and over because the customer kept asking her to do it like Pamela did. His smile was a leash. Vanessa looked up when Pamela walked in. Her expression was relief and warning all at once. "He wants to see you," she said quietly. "In the office." Pamela untied her jacket and hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. She could feel the phones tracking her, recording her, turning her into content. She didn't look at them. She walked through the kitchen, past the line cook who wouldn't meet her eyes, and knocked once on the office door before pushing it open. Dennis Howell sat behind a desk covered in invoices and grease-stained order pads. He was a man who wore his stress in his jaw, in the way he ground his teeth when he thought no one was listening. He'd owned the diner for 12 years and treated it like a living thing that might die if he looked away too long. He looked up when Pamela walked in and didn't tell her to sit. "You've seen it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Seen what?" Dennis turned his laptop around. The screen showed a frozen image of Pamela standing behind the counter, the robber's gun 2 feet from her face. The video player said 2.4 million views. The comments were a waterfall of strangers saying her name, dissecting her expression, calling her brave, calling her reckless, calling her a hero, calling her an idiot who should have just opened the register. Pamela looked at the screen the way she'd looked at the gun, like it was something happening to someone else. "This is a problem," Dennis said. "I didn't film it." "But you're in it." He closed the laptop. "Every news station in the city called this morning. 3 want interviews. 1 wants to do a profile. The health inspector called, the city council called, the mayor's office called Pamela." She looked at the leak in the ceiling she'd told Dennis about 6 months ago, the one that left a rust stain on the tile. He still hadn't fixed it. "You made this place famous," Dennis said, "and I can't afford famous." Andrew didn't knock. He leaned on the buzzer. Pamela's shoulders stayed level. "I did my job." "Your job is to pour coffee and take orders and not make my diner a spectacle." Dennis stood up. He was shorter than her but carried himself like height was something you earned. "You know what the health inspector's going to find when he shows up because of this? You know what happens when people actually look at this place? You could fix the violations. I could fire the woman who put a spotlight on them." The fluorescent light above the desk buzzed. The sound filled the space between them like a third presence. Pamela didn't move. She'd known this was coming the moment she saw the news vans. She'd known it the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop of rain falls. Some things announce themselves in the air. "I didn't ask for this," Pamela said. "You didn't have to." Dennis pulled an envelope from his desk drawer, already prepared, already decided before she walked in. 2 weeks' pay. I'm calling it a layoff. You can file for unemployment." "A layoff?" "It's better than fired." "It's the same thing with a different word." Dennis held out the envelope. Pamela didn't take it. She looked at the man who'd hired her 3 years ago when no one else would, who'd given her the closing shifts that paid an extra $1 an hour, who'd looked the other way when she took home the day-old bread for Elijah. She looked at him and saw exactly what he was, a man who would always choose survival over principle. "You're firing me for not getting shot," she said. "I'm firing you because I can't afford what comes next." Dennis set the envelope on the desk between them. "The news moves on. The cameras leave, but the city doesn't. And when they decide to actually enforce the codes I've been skating on for a decade, I lose everything. This diner is all I have, Pamela. I'm sorry, but I can't let you take it from me. The woman you knew outgrew you." Pamela picked up the envelope. It felt light, like it held nothing at all. She walked out of the office without another word, past the line cook who still wouldn't look at her, through the kitchen door into the dining room where every phone turned toward her like flowers toward the sun. Vanessa was at the counter. "Pam." Pamela untied her apron and set it on the counter next to the coffee machine. She took her jacket from the hook and walked toward the door. The reporter in the red blazer was waiting outside with her microphone ready, but Pamela put her hood up and walked past her the same way she'd walked past the gunman's demands. "Miss Thomas, can we get a statement? How do you feel about being called a hero?" Pamela kept walking, 4 blocks back to her apartment, past the laundromat, past the bodega, past the corner where Elijah caught the bus to school. The city looked the same. The sky was the same gray it had been yesterday, but everything had shifted in a way she couldn't name yet, in a way that felt like standing on a floor that had rotted through without anyone noticing. She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment and unlocked the door. The space was small, a kitchen that opened into a living room that opened into a hallway with 2 bedrooms. Elijah's door was closed. He'd already left for school. The TV was off. The silence was absolute. Pamela sat on the couch and opened the envelope. 2 weeks' pay, $640, exactly what Dennis owed her and not $1 more. She set it on the coffee table and stared at it the way you stare at the pieces of something you used to understand. Her phone buzzed, another unknown number, then another. Then a text from Vanessa, "I'm so sorry, do you need anything?" Pamela turned the phone off and sat in the quiet. Outside, the city kept moving. Cars honked. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. A dog barked on the street below. Life continued because life always continued, whether you were in it or not. You picked the wrong morning. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in 3 years, not since the last time Andrew made her feel small enough to disappear. She'd learned that tears were a currency people used to buy sympathy, and sympathy was just another word for debt. So she sat and breathed and waited for the feeling to pass, the feeling that the floor had finally finished rotting and she was about to fall through. Her phone buzzed again even though she'd turned it off. No, not her phone. A knock at the door. Steady, polite, patient. The kind of knock that said the person on the other side would wait as long as it took. Pamela stood and walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood in her hallway, hands clasped in front of him, expression calm. He didn't look like a reporter. He didn't look like a process server. He looked like someone who had found exactly what he'd been searching for and wasn't leaving until he said what he came to say. She opened the door. Sun Tiang smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Thomas," he said, "we need to talk about the river." Pamela didn't open the door wider. She stood in the frame with one hand on the knob and looked at the man on her doorstep the way she'd look at a storm she hadn't ordered. Sun Tiang was taller than she'd realized watching him from across the diner. His suit was the kind of expensive that didn't announce itself, charcoal gray with no visible seams, tailored to fit like a second language. His hands were clasped in front of him, patient, like he had all the time in the world and knew she had none. "I don't know you," Pamela said. "You saved my life." Tiang's voice was calm, measured, the kind of calm that came from practice. "5 years ago, the bridge over the Hanover River. My car went through the railing and you pulled me out of the water." Pamela's face didn't change. She didn't step back. She didn't invite him in. "You have the wrong person." "I don't." Tiang reached into his jacket slowly, the kind of slow that said he knew how movements could be misread. He pulled out a photograph and held it up. The image showed a younger version of Pamela, soaked to the bone, standing on a riverbank next to a wrecked car that was half submerged in black water. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her expression was the same as it was now, flat, certain, unmoved. She looked at the leak in the ceiling. Pamela looked at the photo for 3 seconds, then met his eyes. "That was a long time ago." 5 years. "And you waited 5 years to knock on my door." "I've been looking for 5 years." Tiang lowered the photograph but didn't put it away. "You didn't leave a name. You didn't wait for the paramedics. By the time I could breathe without choking on river water, you were gone. No one saw which direction you went. No cameras caught your face. You disappeared like you'd never been there. I had somewhere to be. You saved a man's life and left like it was an errand." Pamela's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Why are you here?" "To repay a debt." "I don't need your money." "I'm not offering money." Tiang slid the photograph back into his jacket. "I'm offering a position at my restaurant. Better pay, better hours, better everything than the place that just fired you for doing the right thing." His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. She didn't ask how he knew about the firing. Men in suits like that always knew things before the people living them did. "I don't take favors." "It's not a favor. It's employment." "Employment I didn't ask for from a man I don't know who showed up at my door because he thinks he owes me something." Pamela's voice stayed level. "That's a favor, and every favor comes with a price I didn't agree to pay." Tiang's expression shifted slightly, something behind his eyes adjusting like a lens finding focus. "You think I'm here to own you. I think you're here because you don't like carrying debt, and the fastest way to clear a ledger is to put the person you owe on your payroll." Pamela stepped back and started to close the door. "I'm not interested." Tiang put his hand on the door frame. Not aggressive, not forceful, just present. "What if I told you the job is real, that I need someone who can handle pressure without falling apart, someone who looks at a gun and treats it like weather?" "I'd say you have the wrong idea about what happened in that diner." "I was there." "Then you saw a woman do her job, and nothing more." "I saw a woman who didn't break." Tiang's voice dropped, quieter now, like he was telling a secret. "That's rare, rarer than you think. I've spent the last 5 years looking for you because I wanted to know what kind of person pulls a stranger from a river and walks away. Now I know." She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Pamela looked at his hand on the door frame, then at his face. You don't know anything about me. I know you have a 17-year-old brother named Elijah who takes the bus to Jefferson High every morning. I know you've been supporting him on waitress wages for 3 years. I know you just lost your income and your rent is due in 12 days. Tiang paused. I know you're not going to ask anyone for help because you'd rather starve than owe. Pamela's jaw tightened. Get your hand off my door. Tiang didn't move. The Pearl, that's the name of the restaurant. Fine dining. We serve businessmen, politicians, people who pay more for a meal than you made in a week at that diner. The position is front of house management. You'd oversee seating, handle difficult clients, manage the floor staff. 40 an hour, full benefits, and I'll cover your rent until your first paycheck clears. No. You haven't heard the... I said no. Pamela's voice was flat as pavement. I don't need saving. I don't need a stranger showing up at my door with a job that didn't exist until you decided you owed me. I don't need you digging into my life and learning my brother's name and where he goes to school like that's supposed to make me trust you. It's supposed to show you I'm serious. It shows me you're dangerous. Pamela leaned in slightly, her gaze fixed on his like a nail through wood. Men like you don't just offer jobs, you offer cages with better furniture. You make people feel chosen until they realize chosen is just another word for owned. I've been owned before. I outgrew it. I'm not interested in a different leash. Andrew's smile was a leash. Tiang's expression didn't change, but something in his posture softened. Not weakness, adjustment, like he was recalculating the shape of the conversation. I'm not trying to own you. Then leave. I'm trying to repay. You don't get to decide what I'm owed. Pamela's voice was sharp now, a blade finding bone. You think because you remember my face that gives you permission to walk into my life and fix it. You think one moment 5 years ago means you get to show up and play savior. I pulled you out of the water because that's what you do when someone's drowning. I didn't do it so you could spend 5 years hunting me down and trying to settle a debt I never asked you to carry. Tiang finally moved his hand from the door frame. He stepped back, giving her space, and the hallway felt bigger without his presence filling it. What do you want, Miss Thomas? To be left alone. You're going to lose your apartment. That's my problem. Your brother is my brother, not yours. Pamela's hand tightened on the door. I don't care how much money you have or how guilty you feel or how long you've been looking for me. You don't get to walk into my life and act like you're owed access just because I made a decision 5 years ago that any decent person would have made. I am not something you fix. Tiang stood very still. The hallway light above him flickered once, casting shadows that made his face look older. You're right, he said finally. I don't know you, but I know what it looks like when someone is about to go under, and I know what it feels like to drown. If you won't take the job, take my card. When you change your mind. I won't. When you change your mind, Tiang continued, pulling a business card from his jacket. Call me. The offer stands. No strings, no cage, just work. He set the card on the floor in front of her door and stepped back. Pamela looked at it the way she'd look at a snake that had curled up on her welcome mat. The Pearl is on 5th and Ashland, Tiang said. We open at 5. If you show up, you'll have a job. If you don't, the card has my number. Use it or burn it, your choice. He turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs. His footsteps were even, unhurried, the sound of a man who had said what he came to say and didn't need to hear her response. Pamela watched him disappear down the stairwell before she looked down at the card. Black cardstock, silver lettering, Sun Tiang, proprietor, the Pearl, a phone number. No address, like he expected anyone who needed to find him already knew where to look. Pamela picked up the card and held it between 2 fingers like it might burn her. She stepped back into her apartment and closed the door and locked it and stood there breathing in the quiet. The envelope from Dennis was still on the coffee table, $640. Rent was $900. Elijah's school needed $200 for the trip to the Science Museum next month. Her phone bill was $60. Groceries were another $150 if she stretched them. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked before she got fired, and it worked even less now. She sat on the couch and stared at the card in her hand. Every favor comes with a price. I didn't agree to pay. The words felt true when she said them to Tiang. They felt true now, sitting alone in her apartment with the weight of unpaid bills pressing down like a hand on her chest. But truth didn't pay rent. Truth didn't keep the lights on. Truth didn't keep Elijah safe. Pamela set the card on the coffee table next to the envelope and leaned back against the couch. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. A siren wailed in the distance, rising and falling like a question that never got answered. The city kept moving because the city didn't care whether you were drowning or not. She closed her eyes and saw the bridge. 5 years ago, the water was colder than the silence. Pamela had been walking home from her shift at Morrison's grocery when she heard the tires scream. The sound cut through the rain like a knife through fabric, sharp and wrong and final. She looked up from the sidewalk just in time to see the black sedan lose its fight with physics. The car hit the bridge railing at an angle that should have deflected it, should have sent it spinning back onto the road, should have given the driver a second chance and a story to tell at dinner parties. But the railing was old, the bolts were older, and the impact folded the metal like wet paper. For one impossible moment, the car hung there, balanced, suspended between the bridge and the river below like the universe was deciding which way gravity should pull. Pamela stopped walking. The rain hammered her face. She watched the car teeter on the broken railing, watched it rock forward, watched it tip. Then it fell. The sound it made hitting the water wasn't a splash. It was a crack, like the river had a surface made of bone. The car disappeared beneath the black water, and Pamela stood on the sidewalk 60 feet away with her grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other, and she knew with absolute certainty that whoever was in that car had less than 2 minutes to live. Most people offer 3 things when death walks into a room: shock, prayer, or paralysis. She didn't scream. She didn't call 911 first. She dropped her bag and her phone and ran toward the bridge, her sneakers slapping wet pavement, her breath coming in sharp bursts that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the math she was doing in her head. Distance to the water, depth of the river, temperature, current, time. None of the numbers were good. Pamela reached the broken railing and looked down. The car was already half submerged, sinking nose first into the river like it was being pulled by something hungry underneath. She could see the driver through the windshield, a man in a dark suit, his hands pressed against the glass, his mouth open in what might have been a scream or a prayer or just the shape terror makes when it runs out of other options. The river was 30 feet down, maybe 40. She couldn't tell in the rain, it didn't matter. She kicked off her sneakers, climbed onto the broken railing, and jumped. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. The fall was shorter than she expected and longer than it should have been. The air screamed past her ears. The rain felt like needles. And then the water hit her like a fist, knocking the breath from her lungs and replacing it with cold so total it felt like a presence, like something alive wrapping around her chest and squeezing. She surfaced, gasped, went under again. The current was stronger than it looked from the bridge, pulling her downstream away from the car. She fought it, arms cutting through water that felt thick as mud, legs kicking against the weight of her jeans. 20 feet, 15, 10. The car was sinking faster now. The driver's side was already underwater. The passenger side was going. Pamela could see the man inside more clearly now, younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, his face pressed against the window, his eyes wide and white and already accepting what was coming. She reached the car and grabbed the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. She pounded on the window with her fist, and the man inside looked at her like she was a ghost, like his brain couldn't process that someone had followed him into the water. Pamela pointed at the lock. He didn't move. She pointed again, harder, more insistent, and finally his hand moved, fumbling for the button. The lock clicked. Pamela yanked the door open and the river rushed in, filling the car in seconds. The man went under. She grabbed his jacket, his arm, his collar, anything she could reach, and pulled. He was heavier than he looked, or the water made him heavier, or the car didn't want to let him go. She pulled harder, her lungs burning, her vision starting to narrow at the edges. "You don't want to do this." The man came free all at once, like a cork from a bottle. Pamela kicked toward the surface, one arm wrapped around his chest, the other clawing at the water. Her lungs were screaming. Her muscles were screaming. The cold was everywhere now, not just outside her body, but inside it, in her bones, in her blood, turning her into something slow and heavy and desperate. They broke the surface together. The man gasped and choked and vomited river water. Pamela held his head above the surface and looked toward the shore. 50 feet. Might as well have been 50 miles. The current was pulling them downstream, away from the bridge, toward a section of the river where the banks turned to concrete and there was nothing to grab onto. She kicked. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone who didn't know how to ignore pain. The man in her arms had stopped fighting. He'd gone limp, either unconscious or too cold to move. Pamela kicked harder. 40 feet. 30. 20. Her hand hit something solid. A fallen tree branch jutting from the bank, half submerged, thick as her arm. She grabbed it with one hand and pulled, dragging herself and the man toward the shore. The branch held. The bank was steep, slick with mud, but there were roots, and roots meant handholds. She hauled them both onto the shore and collapsed face first into the mud. The rain kept falling. The river kept moving. And Pamela lay there breathing in short, sharp bursts, her body shaking so hard her teeth clattered, until she remembered the man beside her. She rolled onto her side. He wasn't breathing. His lips were blue. His eyes were closed. Pamela pressed 2 fingers to his neck and found a pulse, faint and irregular, the kind of pulse that was thinking about stopping. She looked at the gun like a leak in the ceiling. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and breathed into his mouth. Once, twice, pressed her hands to his chest and counted compressions. 30, 2 breaths, 30 more compressions, 2 more breaths. The rhythm was mechanical, drilled into her from the CPR class she'd taken at the community center 3 years ago when she thought she might want to be a nurse. The man convulsed. River water poured from his mouth. He rolled onto his side and vomited more water, coughing so hard it sounded like his lungs were tearing. Pamela sat back on her heels and watched him breathe. In the distance, sirens. Someone had finally called 911. Someone had seen the car go over. The ambulance would be here in minutes, maybe less. They'd wrap him in blankets and check his vitals and take him to a hospital where doctors would fix whatever the river had broken. Pamela stood. Her legs shook but held. The man on the ground was still coughing, still breathing, still alive. That was enough. She didn't need to wait for the paramedics. She didn't need to give a statement. She didn't need her name in a police report or her face in a newspaper or someone asking why she'd jumped. She'd done what needed doing, nothing more. The man's eyes opened. He looked at her through the rain, his face pale as paper, his expression somewhere between shock and gratitude and confusion. He tried to speak, but his voice was just air, just breath with no shape. Pamela turned and walked up the muddy bank toward the road. Her phone was still on the bridge. Her sneakers were at the bottom of the river. Her grocery bag with the bread and the eggs and the milk for Elijah was probably halfway to the next county by now. But she was alive, and the man behind her was alive, and that was the only math that mattered. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was 6 blocks away, shivering in her soaked clothes, walking barefoot on pavement that felt warm compared to the river. She didn't look back. She didn't think about the man she'd pulled from the water or wonder if he'd be okay or imagine what he might say if she'd stayed. She went home. She took a hot shower until her skin turned red. She made Elijah dinner with whatever was left in the fridge. She went to bed and didn't dream about the river or the car or the way the man's eyes had looked when he realized someone had followed him into the water. And for 5 years, she never thought about him again. Until he showed up at her door. Hard cut to the present day. The card sat on Pamela's coffee table like evidence of a crime she didn't remember committing. Black cardstock, silver lettering, a phone number that connected to a man who'd spent 5 years searching for a face he saw for 30 seconds while choking on river water. Pamela stood at her kitchen counter with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. The apartment was quiet. Elijah was at school. The city outside her window moved in its usual rhythm, cars and horns and footsteps, the sound of life continuing whether you were ready or not. The envelope from Dennis sat next to the card. $640. Rent was due in 11 days now. The math still didn't work. The math would never work. She could stretch the money, cut the groceries, skip her phone bill, but eventually the numbers would run out and the landlord would knock and she'd have to explain why she couldn't pay. Or she could pick up the card. Pamela set down her coffee and walked to the table. She looked at the card the way she'd looked at the river 5 years ago, like it was a problem with only one solution, and that solution required jumping into something cold and dark with no promise of making it back to the surface. She picked up the card. Her phone was in her pocket. The number was right there, silver ink on black cardstock, 10 digits that separated her from drowning or pulled her toward a different kind of water entirely. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, stared at the keypad. Every favor comes with a price. I didn't agree to pay. She put the phone down. She put the card down. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below and tried to remember what it felt like 5 years ago when her body made decisions her brain didn't have time to question. When she saw a car go into the water and didn't stop to calculate the cost. When she jumped because jumping was the only answer that made sense. But this wasn't a river. This was a man in a tailored suit offering her a cage with better furniture, and the moment she accepted his help, she'd owe him something she couldn't name yet and wouldn't be able to refuse later. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elijah. Forgot lunch money, can you send some? Pamela looked at her bank app. $47 until Friday. She sent him 10 and watched the number drop to 37. The card sat on the table. The river was 5 years behind her. The bridge was something she'd walked away from and never looked back at. Until now. Pamela stood outside the Pearl for 3 full minutes before she decided to walk in. The restaurant sat on the corner of 5th and Ashland like it owned the block. Floor-to-ceiling windows, black trim, a doorman in a suit that probably cost more than her rent. The kind of place where people whispered instead of talked and paid for silence as much as they paid for food. She'd called the number on the card 2 days ago. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. Tiang answered on the second ring. She said she'd take the job. He said to arrive at 4 on Tuesday for training. She said fine. He said he'd have her contract ready. She hung up before he could say anything else that sounded like gratitude. Now it was 4 o'clock on Tuesday, and Pamela was standing on the sidewalk in the only professional clothes she owned. Black slacks she'd bought at Goodwill, and a white button-down that was too big in the shoulders. Watching well-dressed people walk past her into a world she didn't belong to. The doorman looked at her, not unkindly, but with the question people always asked without speaking. Are you sure you're in the right place? Pamela walked through the door. The interior was all dark wood and low lighting. Tables with white cloth and silverware that looked sharp enough to require a permit. A bar along the back wall made of marble or something that wanted to be marble. The air smelled like money and rosemary, and the kind of wine people described with words like notes and finish. A woman in a black dress approached with a smile that was professional as a handshake. Good evening. Do you have a reservation? I'm here to see Sun Tiang. The smile adjusted slightly, recalibrating. Of course, your name. Pamela Thomas. The woman's expression changed completely. The professional distance evaporated, replaced by something closer to recognition or maybe relief. Miss Thomas, Mr. Sun is expecting you. Please follow me. She led Pamela through the dining room. Every table they passed went quiet for half a second, conversations pausing like someone had pressed a button, then resuming at a lower volume. Pamela felt the weight of eyes on her back, measuring, assessing, deciding. His smile was a leash. They walked past the bar, through a door marked private, down a hallway lined with black and white photographs of buildings Pamela didn't recognize. The woman stopped at an office door and knocked twice. Come in, Tiang's voice muffled through wood. The woman opened the door and gestured for Pamela to enter. The office was smaller than she expected. A desk, 2 chairs, a window overlooking the alley. Tiang sat behind the desk in shirt sleeves, no jacket, reading something on a tablet. He looked up when she walked in and stood immediately. "Miss Thomas," he gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." Pamela sat. The woman in the black dress closed the door behind her, leaving them alone. Tiang sat back down and slid a manila folder across the desk. "Your contract. Base pay is 40 an hour, 50 for any hours past 40 in a week. Health insurance starts after 30 days. Dental after 60. I'll cover your first month's rent as a signing bonus. The check will be ready by the end of the week." Pamela opened the folder and scanned the pages. Standard employment contract, non-compete clause, confidentiality agreement. Nothing that set off immediate alarms, but she'd learned that the worst cages didn't announce themselves on paper. "What's the confidentiality for?" she asked. "We serve a specific clientele, politicians, business owners, people who value discretion. What you see here, what you hear here, stays here. That's the job." "And if I see something illegal?" Tiang's expression didn't change. "You report it to me, I handle it. If it's serious, we contact the authorities. But most of what you'll see is just people being human, ugly divorces, bad business deals, affairs, nothing worth the police." She looked at the leak in the ceiling. Pamela set the contract down. "You said front of house management. What does that actually mean?" "You'll oversee seating arrangements, manage the floor staff, handle difficult clients, make sure the dining room runs smoothly. Essentially, you'll be the person who makes sure no one has a reason to complain." Tiang paused. "You'll also be my eyes when I can't be in the room. I need someone who can read people, someone who knows when a situation is about to go wrong before it does." "You have security for that." "Security stops problems after they start. I need someone who prevents them." He leaned back in his chair. "You stood in front of a gun and made the man holding it question his choices. That's the skill I'm paying for." Pamela looked at him the way she'd looked at Andrew the first time he told her she was special. Like the words were a trap disguised as a compliment. "When do I start?" "Tonight, training shift. You'll shadow our current floor manager, Veronica. She'll show you the seating chart, introduce you to the staff, walk you through our reservation system. Tomorrow you'll take point on your own section. By the end of the week, you'll run the entire floor." "That's fast." "You don't strike me as someone who needs their hand held." Pamela picked up the contract and flipped to the last page. Signature line, blank and waiting. She pulled a pen from her pocket and signed her name, the letters sharp and clean, then slid the folder back across the desk. Tiang took it without ceremony. "Welcome to the Pearl, Miss Thomas." "You picked the wrong morning." Training lasted 2 hours. Veronica was a woman in her 40s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and the kind of posture that suggested she'd worked in fine dining since before Pamela was born. She spoke in clipped, efficient sentences and expected Pamela to keep up. "Section 1 is the main floor, 12 tables seating 4 to 6. Section 2 is the private booths along the east wall, 8 booths seating 2 to 4. Section 3 is the back room for large parties and business meetings. 1 table seats up to 20. They walked through the dining room. It was 5:30 now. The restaurant would open in 30 minutes and staff were moving through final preparations. Servers in black uniforms set tables. The bartender polished glasses. A man Pamela hadn't seen before stood near the entrance wearing a suit that made the doormans look cheap. "That's Quan," Veronica said, following Pamela's gaze. "Head of security. If someone gets aggressive, you get Quan. Don't try to handle it yourself." "What kind of aggressive?" "The kind that happens when men with too much money drink too much wine and forget they're not the only people in the room." Veronica handed Pamela a tablet. "This is the reservation system. Names, party size, special requests, dietary restrictions. You'll check people in here and assign tables based on the seating chart." The tablet's screen showed a digital layout of the restaurant. Tables were marked with numbers. Some were already filled in with names and times. Pamela scrolled through the list. She recognized 3 names from the news: a city councilman, a real estate developer, someone who'd been indicted for fraud 6 months ago and somehow wasn't in prison yet. "We don't judge the clientele," Veronica said, reading her expression. "We seat them, serve them, and take their money. What they do outside these walls isn't our concern." Pamela looked up from the tablet. "And if what they do inside these walls is a problem?" "Then you tell Mr. Sun and he handles it." Veronica checked her watch. "We open in 20 minutes. You'll stand with me at the host station and observe. Don't speak unless I ask you a question. Don't seat anyone unless I tell you to. Just watch." "The woman you knew outgrew you." The doors opened at 6. The first guests arrived in a wave of expensive cologne and quiet entitlement. Veronica greeted each party with the same practiced warmth, checked their names against the tablet, and guided them to their tables with the precision of someone playing chess 6 moves ahead. Pamela stood beside her and watched. She watched how Veronica sized up each party in the first 3 seconds, how she adjusted her tone based on who was walking through the door, how she steered a loud group toward the back section and placed a couple having a tense conversation in a corner booth where no one else could hear. By 7:30, the restaurant was full, every table occupied. The noise level was a low hum of conversation and silverware on porcelain. Pamela noticed the security, 3 men in dark suits positioned at strategic points around the room, their eyes moving constantly, cataloging exits and potential problems. Tiang emerged from the kitchen at 8. He'd put his jacket back on. He walked through the dining room slowly, stopping at tables, shaking hands, speaking in low tones that suggested familiarity. He caught Pamela's eye once from across the room and nodded, not approval, acknowledgement. At 8:45, a party of 4 arrived without a reservation. 2 men in their 50s, 2 women half their age. The men had the look of people used to getting what they wanted, and what they wanted was a table immediately. "I'm sorry," Veronica said, her smile never wavering. "We're fully booked tonight. I can put you on the wait list, but it may be an hour or more." "We don't wait," one of the men said. His voice was loud enough to turn heads. "Do you know who I am?" "I don't, sir, but our policy." "Get me your manager." Veronica's smile tightened. She glanced at Pamela, then back at the man. "1 moment, please." She stepped away from the host station and walked toward the kitchen. The man watched her go with an expression that said he'd already won. Pamela stayed at the station, tablet in hand, and met his eyes with the same flat gaze she'd given the robber. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. "You work here?" the man asked. "I do." "Then get us a table." Pamela looked at the tablet, then back at him. "We're fully booked. The earliest opening is at 10:15. I can put your name down." "I don't think you understand. I'm a friend of the owner." "Then you should have called ahead." The man's face darkened. "Excuse me." Friends of the owner make reservations like everyone else. Otherwise, you're just another walk-in. The dining room had gone quiet. Not completely, but enough that Pamela could feel the weight of attention shifting toward the host station. The man in front of her looked like he was deciding between making a scene and walking out. His hands clenched. His jaw worked. Before he could speak, Tiang appeared beside Pamela. He'd moved so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. His expression was calm, unreadable, the kind of calm that made the air feel heavier. "Gentlemen," Tiang said, "is there a problem?" The man's demeanor changed instantly. "Son, I didn't realize. We were just hopping to get a table. I should have called, but—" "You should have." Tiang's voice was polite, final. "We're fully booked tonight. I can have my assistant reach out tomorrow to schedule something for later this week." The man nodded too quickly. "Of course, yes, that would be yes." He left. His party followed. The dining room resumed its low hum. Tiang turned to Pamela. "That was Anthony Breslin. He spends $50,000 here every year." "He doesn't have a reservation," Pamela said. "No, he doesn't." Tiang's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been amusement or approval or both. "Veronica would have found him a table." "Veronica's not managing the floor tomorrow. I am." "I am not something you fix." Tiang studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "No, you are." He glanced at the tablet in her hands. Table 7. You have the Nakamura party arriving in 10 minutes. Businessman from Tokyo, here with his wife and 2 associates. They're seated in Section 2, Booth 4. Check the reservation notes. His wife is allergic to shellfish. Pamela looked at the tablet. Table 7 was listed wrong. The note said Booth 4, but Booth 4 was already occupied by another party that wouldn't be leaving for at least another hour. She looked up. The seating chart has them in the wrong spot. Tiang frowned. He pulled out his phone and checked something. Booth 4 should be clear by 9. It's not. The Marshall party just ordered dessert. Tiang looked across the dining room toward Booth 4. His jaw tightened slightly. He turned back to Pamela. Move the Nakamura party to Booth 6. Booth 6 faces the kitchen doors. Bad placement for a business dinner. Then where would you put them? Pamela scrolled through the tablet, checking the floor layout and timing. Booth 2 will be clear in 15 minutes. Seat them there. Comp their first bottle of wine for the wait. Tiang looked at her the way someone looks at a chess opponent who just made an unexpected move. Booth 2. Better sightline, quieter, further from foot traffic. If they're here for business, they need privacy. The corner of Tiang's mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Booth 2, comp the wine. He looked past her toward the door. They just arrived. Show them to the bar. I'll let them know personally about the delay. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Pamela walked to the entrance and greeted the Nakamura party with the same calm efficiency Veronica had demonstrated all night. She explained the situation. She guided them to the bar. She made sure their first drinks were on the house. And when Booth 2 cleared 12 minutes later, she seated them herself and watched as Tiang approached the table with a bottle of wine he'd chosen specifically for them. The rest of the night passed without incident. By the time the last guests left at 11:30, Pamela's feet ached and her head buzzed with names and faces and reservation times. Veronica approached her at the host station while she was closing out the tablet. You corrected Mr. Sun's seating chart, Veronica said. It was wrong. In front of the entire floor. The floor was busy. No one was paying attention. Veronica smiled, but it looked more like a warning. People always pay attention when someone questions Mr. Sun, especially his own staff. Pamela powered down the tablet and set it on the station. Then he shouldn't make mistakes. She walked past Veronica toward the exit. Behind her, she heard someone laugh quietly. She didn't turn around. She pushed through the door into the night air and started the walk toward the bus stop. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tiang. You start at 4 tomorrow. Don't be late. Another text 3 seconds later. And don't ever hold back. If I'm wrong, tell me. Pamela stared at the messages, then put her phone in her pocket and kept walking. The city stretched out around her, lit by street lights and neon and the glow of windows where other people's lives were happening. Somewhere behind her, the Pearl was closing down for the night. Tomorrow she'd go back. The day after that. The day after that. She'd taken the cage. Now she had to figure out if the door was locked. 3 weeks into working at the Pearl, Pamela learned that the restaurant had 2 faces. The first face belonged to the guests. Polished silverware and rehearsed smiles. Wine that cost more than groceries. Conversations conducted in the language of people who believed their problems mattered more than anyone else's. That face appeared at 6 o'clock and disappeared by midnight, leaving behind empty tables and credit card receipts that made Pamela's weekly paycheck look like pocket change. The second face emerged after the doors locked. After the last guest stumbled into their car service and the servers finished counting tips and the kitchen staff scrubbed down the line. That's when the restaurant became something else entirely. Something quieter. Something that felt less like a business and more like a kingdom where the rules were written in a language Pamela was still learning to read. It was 1:15 on a Thursday morning. Pamela stood at the host station reconciling the night's seating chart with the reservation system, making notes about which tables turned over slowly and which guests had been difficult. The dining room was empty now, except for 2 servers wiping down tables and Quan standing near the door like a statue that had forgotten it was allowed to move. She heard the office door open, footsteps on hardwood. Tiang emerged from the back hallway carrying a leather portfolio and walking like someone who'd forgotten what sleep felt like. He crossed the dining room without acknowledging the servers and stopped at the bar. Pamela watched him pour himself 2 fingers of something amber from a bottle that didn't have a label. He drank it in one motion, set the glass down harder than necessary, and stood there staring at nothing. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. Not the hand holding the glass, the other one, his left. It rested on the bar's surface and trembled slightly, the kind of tremor that came from pain or adrenaline or both. Pamela set down her tablet and walked across the dining room. "You're hurt," she said. Tiang looked up. For half a second, his expression was unguarded, something raw and exhausted flickering across his face before the careful mask slid back into place. "It's nothing. Your hand is shaking." "I'm fine." Pamela moved closer. In the low light, she could see it now. The knuckles on his left hand were swollen and beginning to bruise, the skin split in 2 places. Fresh, maybe an hour old. He'd wrapped it poorly with gauze that was already seeping through with blood. "That needs ice," she said. "It needs to be left alone." Tiang pulled his hand off the bar and tucked it into his pocket. "Go home, Miss Thomas, it's late." "It's also Thursday. You owe me overtime if I stay past 1. "Then I'll pay it. Or you could ice your hand and stop pretending you're fine when you're clearly not." She looked at the gun like a leak in the ceiling. Tiang's jaw tightened. He pulled his hand from his pocket and looked at it like he'd forgotten it was attached to him. The bruising was worse than Pamela had initially thought, spreading across 3 knuckles, the kind of damage that came from hitting something solid repeatedly. "There's a first aid kit in the kitchen," Pamela said. "And ice, sit." She gestured to one of the bar stools. Tiang didn't move. He stood there holding his injured hand like evidence he wasn't ready to present, and Pamela could see him calculating the cost of accepting help versus the cost of bleeding through another layer of gauze. "That wasn't a request," she said. Something in her tone shifted the equation. Tiang sat. Pamela walked into the kitchen, found the first aid kit mounted near the fire extinguisher, and filled a clean towel with ice from the machine. When she returned to the bar, Tiang had poured himself another drink. This one he hadn't touched. She set the ice and the kit on the bar. "Give me your hand." "I can do it myself." "You wrapped it like someone who learned first aid from a movie. Give me your hand." Tiang hesitated, then extended his left hand across the bar. Pamela unwrapped the gauze slowly, peeling away layers that had stuck to the wounds with dried blood. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just watched her work with the same calm intensity he brought to everything, like pain was just another detail that required management. The skin underneath was a mess, 2 deep splits across the knuckles, swelling that would get worse before it got better. The kind of injury that came from punching someone without gloves or concern for the consequences. "Every favor comes with a price. I didn't agree to pay." Pamela pressed the ice-filled towel against his knuckles. Tiang's breath caught for half a second, then evened out. She held the ice there for 30 seconds, then removed it and opened the first aid kit. "This is going to sting," she said. She cleaned the wounds with antiseptic. Tiang's hand twitched once but stayed steady. She applied antibiotic ointment, then wrapped the knuckles with fresh gauze, keeping it tight enough to compress the swelling without cutting off circulation. When she finished, his hand looked like it had been treated by someone who actually knew what they were doing. "Keep the ice on for 20 minutes, Pamela said. "Then off for 20. Repeat that for the next 3 hours. Take ibuprofen if you have it. If the swelling doesn't go down by tomorrow, you need to see a doctor." "I'm not seeing a doctor." "Then you'll have permanent damage to your hand, and I'll have to find a new job when you can't run this place anymore because your fingers don't work." Tiang almost smiled. "Almost. You're worried about your job security." "I'm worried about having to train under someone else if you're too stubborn to take care of yourself." He picked up the ice with his good hand and pressed it against his wrapped knuckles. The tremor had stopped. Now he just looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep wouldn't fix. Why are you still here, Miss Thomas? You're bleeding on your own bar. Someone has to make sure you don't pass out. I've had worse. That doesn't mean you should have this. You picked the wrong morning. Tiang studied her across the bar. The dining room was completely quiet now. The servers had finished and left. Quan had disappeared into whatever shadow he materialized from. It was just the two of them and the low hum of the refrigeration system in the kitchen and the city outside the windows, still awake, still moving, still indifferent to whether anyone inside was hurting. You don't ask questions, Tiang said. About what? About where the bruises come from, what I was doing, who I was hitting. Pamela met his gaze. Would you tell me if I asked? No. Then why waste the question? Most people can't help themselves. They see something broken and need to know how it broke. You just fix it and move on. I'm not most people. No, Tiang adjusted the ice, winced slightly. You're not. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just present. Pamela started gathering the used gauze and wrappers from the first aid kit, organizing them for disposal. She could feel Tiang watching her, measuring something, deciding something. I had a meeting tonight, he said finally. After we closed, someone thought they could renegotiate terms of an agreement we'd already settled. They were wrong. Pamela kept cleaning up. Did they learn that? Eventually. Good. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Tiang set down the ice. His hand had stopped bleeding completely. The gauze wrap was holding. You're not going to ask if I hurt them. Did you? Yes. Did they deserve it? That depends on your definition of deserve. Pamela looked at him directly. My definition is, did they try to hurt you or someone you're responsible for protecting first? They did. Then I don't need to ask anything else. Tiang's expression shifted. Something in his eyes softened, not weakness but recognition, like he'd been testing a theory and just confirmed the hypothesis. You've seen violence before. It wasn't a question, but Pamela answered anyway. I've seen men who use it as a language and men who use it as a last resort. You're the second kind. How do you know? Because the first kind wouldn't have let me wrap their hand. They'd have worn the blood like a badge. Tiang picked up the drink he'd poured earlier and finally took a sip. He set the glass down gently this time, no force, no frustration. You should go home, Miss Thomas. It's after 2. You should ice your hand for another 18 minutes. I will. You won't. You'll finish that drink and go back to your office and work until sunrise like you do every Thursday. Tiang raised an eyebrow. You've been paying attention. It's my job to pay attention. You hired me to read the room. You're part of the room. I'm your employer. That doesn't make you invisible. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. Pamela closed the first aid kit and picked up the soiled gauze to throw away. She walked toward the kitchen, then stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, you should let your knuckles heal before you punch anyone else. Next time, you might break something that doesn't fix itself. I'll keep that in mind. Do that. She pushed through the kitchen door and disposed of the medical waste in the proper bin. When she came back out, Tiang was still sitting at the bar with the ice pressed against his hand, staring at his untouched drink like it held answers he didn't want to find. Pamela grabbed her jacket from the hook near the host station. She pulled it on and checked her phone. 2:20 a.m., the last bus had stopped running an hour ago. She'd have to walk the 40 minutes home or pay for a car service she couldn't afford. I'll have someone drive you, Tiang said without looking up. I can walk. At 2 in the morning, no. I've walked later. Not while working for me. Tiang finally looked at her. Quan will take you. Consider it part of your benefits package. Pamela wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was catching up to her now, settling into her bones like the cold from the river 5 years ago. She nodded once. Quan materialized from wherever he'd been waiting. He didn't speak, just gestured toward the door. Pamela followed him outside to a black sedan parked at the curb. He opened the back door. She got in. The drive home was silent. Quan drove like someone who'd memorized the city's rhythms, taking shortcuts that avoided traffic lights and empty intersections where time stretched too thin. They reached her building in 23 minutes. Quan pulled to the curb and put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. "He's not used to people who don't ask for permission before helping," Quan said. His voice was deeper than Pamela expected, with an accent she couldn't place. "I wasn't asking for permission." "I know, that's why he's not used to it." Pamela opened the door. "Tell him to ice his hand for the full 20 minutes. "I will, he won't listen." "Then tell him I said he's being stupid." Quan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested amusement. "That I'll definitely tell him." Pamela got out and closed the door. The sedan pulled away, disappearing into the early morning dark. She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment and unlocked the door as quietly as possible. Elijah was asleep. The apartment was dark except for the light she'd left on in the kitchen. She sat on the couch without turning on any other lights. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize and 1 text from Tiang, sent 4 minutes ago. "Thank you." She stared at the message for a long time. 2 words. Simple. Direct. The kind of thing people said without thinking. But Pamela knew that Tiang didn't say anything without thinking. Every word he spoke was measured, chosen, deployed with the precision of someone who understood that language was just another form of control. Thank you meant debt. It meant obligation. It meant she'd crossed a line from employee to something else, something without a clear definition, and now they were both standing on uncertain ground trying to figure out the new geography. Pamela deleted the message without responding. She set her phone face down on the coffee table and closed her eyes. Outside, the city prepared for another morning. Inside, she tried not to think about the way Tiang's hand had trembled, or the way he'd let her help him, or the way helping him had felt less like a favor and more like a choice she'd made without permission. The cage door was still open, but the space inside was starting to feel less like a cage and more like something she didn't have a word for yet. And that terrified her more than any gun ever could. Pamela was folding laundry when the buzzer rang. It was Saturday, her day off. Elijah was sprawled on the couch doing homework that was due Monday and pretending he wasn't checking his phone every 30 seconds. The apartment smelled like the detergent she bought in bulk and the chicken she had defrosting for dinner. Normal, quiet, safe. The buzzer rang again. Long, insistent. The kind of ring that said whoever was downstairs wasn't asking permission, just announcing arrival. Pamela set down the shirt she was folding and walked to the intercom. She pressed the button. Yes. Static, then a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years. "It's me, Pam, buzz me up." The world didn't stop. The laundry didn't catch fire. The walls didn't collapse. But something inside Pamela's chest seized like a fist had closed around her lungs and forgotten how to let go. "Andrew." She stood with her finger on the intercom button, not pressing it, not releasing it, just frozen in the space between responding and refusing. Behind her, Elijah looked up from his phone. "Who is it?" he asked. Pamela didn't answer. The buzzer rang again. "Pam, come on. I just want to talk, 5 minutes." His voice was the same, warm, reasonable. The kind of voice that made you feel like denying him was your failure, not his intrusion. Pamela's hand moved to the door lock out of muscle memory, 3 years of conditioning trying to overwrite 3 years of freedom. She pulled her hand back. Andrew didn't knock. He leaned on the buzzer. "I'm not letting you up," Pamela said into the intercom. "I drove 2 hours to see you." "I didn't ask you to." "Please, just 5 minutes. I need to," Static crackled. "I need to explain some things." Elijah stood up from the couch. He was 17 now, taller than Pamela, with their father's build and their mother's eyes, and a protective instinct that had started manifesting the day Pamela came home 3 years ago and told him she was leaving someone named Andrew behind. "Who's Andrew?" Elijah asked. Pamela looked at her brother, at the way his hands had curled into loose fists, at the way he'd positioned himself between her and the door without thinking about it. She wanted to tell him to sit down. She wanted to tell him it was fine, she could handle this, he didn't need to worry. But her voice had gone somewhere she couldn't reach. The intercom crackled again. "Pam, don't make me wait out here. You know I hate waiting." Something in his tone, not quite a threat, not quite a plea. Something that lived in the space between them, something that sounded like concern but felt like a hand tightening around her throat. Elijah walked to the intercom. "She said she's not letting you up." Silence. Then, "Who's this?" "Her brother." "Elijah." Andrew's voice shifted, became softer, more intimate, like they were old friends. "I've heard so much about you. Your sister talks about you all the time, or she used to back when we—" "She doesn't want to see you," Elijah said. "Leave." "I'm not talking to you, kid. I'm talking to Pam." Another buzz. "Pam, tell your little brother to back off. This is between us." She looked at the gun like a leak in the ceiling. Pamela's hand shot out and grabbed Elijah's wrist, pulling him away from the intercom. She pressed the button herself. Her voice came out flat, empty, the same voice she'd used on the robber, but hollowed out, scraped clean of everything that made it hers. "Go away, Andrew." "Not until we talk." "We have nothing to talk about." 3 years, Pam. You disappeared for 3 years without a word. You think you can just erase what we had? What we had was over the day I left. That's not how this works. You don't get to decide when we're done. We decide together. That's what partnership means. Pamela's grip on the intercom button tightened. Elijah was watching her now with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something between fear and fury, like he was watching his sister turn into someone he didn't recognize. "I'm calling the police," Elijah said. "No," Pamela's voice was sharp. "Don't. He's harassing you." "I said don't." Andrew's voice came through the speaker, smooth as oil. "Listen to your sister, Elijah. She knows how this goes. The police show up, they ask questions, they write a report, and then they leave. And I'm still here. I'm always here. That's what Pam doesn't understand. Distance doesn't erase people." His smile was a leash. Pamela released the intercom button. She walked away from the wall and sat on the couch in the exact spot Elijah had vacated. She folded her hands in her lap. She stared at the coffee table like it held instructions for what to do when your past showed up at your door and refused to stay buried. The buzzer rang again, and again, and again. Elijah stood in the middle of the living room, looking between his sister and the intercom like he was watching a hostage situation unfold, and couldn't figure out which one of them was the hostage. "Pam," he said quietly, "what do you want me to do?" Pamela couldn't answer. The words were there. Tell him to leave, call someone, lock the door, don't let him in. But they were stuck somewhere between her brain and her mouth, trapped behind 3 years of deprogramming that suddenly felt as thin as paper. The buzzing stopped. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy, deliberate, coming up instead of down. "He's coming up anyway," Elijah said. Pamela stood. Her legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. She walked to the door and checked the lock, checked it again. The deadbolt was engaged. The chain was on. The door was solid metal with a peephole. He couldn't get in. He couldn't get in unless she let him. But her hand moved toward the lock anyway. Elijah grabbed her wrist. "Don't. You picked the wrong morning." A knock, not the buzzer. The door. 3 measured knocks that echoed through the apartment like a heartbeat. "Pam, open the door." She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there with her brother's hand on her wrist and her own hand frozen inches from the lock. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." Andrew's voice was muffled by the door but still clear, still certain, still carrying that tone of inevitability that made resistance feel like wasted effort. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk. 5 minutes, that's all. Then I'll leave and you never have to see me again. But you owe me that much. After everything, you owe me a conversation." "She doesn't owe you anything," Elijah said, loud enough for Andrew to hear through the door. "Elijah, right? 17, junior at Jefferson High. You're on the chess team. Made regionals last year. Your sister used to be so proud of that. She'd tell me about your matches, how you could see 8 moves ahead. Smart kid. Takes after your sister." Pamela's breath caught. Elijah's grip on her wrist tightened. "How do you know that?" Elijah asked. "I know a lot of things. I know your sister works at some fancy restaurant now. The Pearl, 5th and Ashland. I know she walks home sometimes after her shift. Late, when the streets are empty. That's dangerous, Pam. You should be more careful. The woman you knew outgrew you." Something broke, not in the room, inside Pamela. Something that had been holding her upright for 3 years snapped clean through, and she felt herself falling even though her feet were still on the floor. She pulled away from Elijah and walked back to the couch. She sat. She folded her hands. She stared at nothing. Elijah stared at her. "Pam." She didn't respond. Couldn't. Her voice had left completely now. Her body was still there, still sitting, still breathing, but everything that made her her had retreated somewhere deep and unreachable. The same place she used to go when Andrew would spend 3 hours explaining why her thoughts were wrong and his were right, when he'd hold her face in his hands and speak so gently about all the ways she'd disappointed him. "Pam," Elijah's voice was rising now, panic creeping in. "Talk to me." Andrew knocked again. "That's what I'm talking about, Elijah. Your sister does this. She shuts down, stops communicating, leaves people on the outside wondering what they did wrong. It's not healthy. She needs help, professional help. I tried to get her to see someone when we were together, but she refused. Too proud. Too stubborn. Maybe you'll have better luck." Elijah moved to the door, not to open it, to speak through it. His voice was low and controlled and absolutely lethal. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police. And if you ever come near my sister again, I will make sure you regret it." Big words from a kid. "Try me." Silence, long enough that Pamela thought maybe Andrew had left. Maybe the threat from a 17-year-old had been enough. Maybe she could breathe again. Then Andrew's voice, quieter now, almost intimate. "I'll be around, Pam. When you're ready to talk like an adult, you know how to find me. I'm staying at the Meridian Hotel, room 412. I'll be there all week." Footsteps, descending this time, getting quieter, gone. She sat across from a stranger who was too broken to ask for help. Elijah locked the deadbolt even though it was already locked. He checked the chain. He looked through the peephole to confirm the hallway was empty. Then he turned to his sister. "Pam." She didn't look at him. "Pam, he's gone." She didn't move. Elijah crossed the room and knelt in front of the couch. He took his sister's hands in his. They were cold. She was staring past him at something he couldn't see, her eyes focused on a point that didn't exist in this apartment, in this city, in this timeline. "Hey, look at me." Elijah squeezed her hands. "Pam, please." Nothing. She was gone. Still breathing, still present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. Elijah had never seen her like this. In 3 years, through all the late shifts and early mornings and struggles to keep them both fed and housed, he'd never seen his sister break. He pulled out his phone. He didn't know who to call. The police? What would he say? A man knocked on our door and my sister stopped existing. He scrolled through her recent contacts. Vanessa from the old diner. Some numbers he didn't recognize, then a name he'd heard mentioned once or twice, Tiang. Elijah pressed call before he could think about it. The phone rang twice. Then, "Miss Thomas." "This isn't Miss Thomas. This is Elijah, her brother." A pause. "Is she all right?" "No." Elijah looked at his sister's blank face. "No, she's not. Someone came to our apartment. Someone from before. I don't know what to call it. She's just sitting here. She won't talk. She won't look at me. She's just gone." Another pause, longer this time. Then Tiang's voice, different now, harder. "What's your address?" Elijah gave it. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The call ended. Elijah set his phone down and looked at his sister. She hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, was still staring at that point in space that existed only for her. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. "Someone who's going to help. Just hold on, okay? Just hold on." But Pamela couldn't hear him. She was 3 years in the past, sitting in an apartment that smelled different and felt smaller, listening to Andrew explain in his calm, reasonable voice why everything wrong in her life was her fault and everything right was his gift to her. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. People walked. Life continued. Inside apartment 3B, a woman who had pulled a stranger from a river and stared down a gun without flinching sat on her couch and surrendered to the one thing she'd never been able to fight. The voice that told her she was small. The voice that made her believe it. The voice that had just proven, with 3 knocks and 1 name, that distance was an illusion, and freedom was something she'd only borrowed. Andrew was back, and this time, Pamela wasn't sure she remembered how to fight. Tiang arrived in 11 minutes. Elijah heard the knock, 3 measured raps, nothing like Andrew's demand for entry, and checked the peephole before opening the door. The man on the other side wore dark jeans and a plain black shirt, no suit, no polish, just someone who'd left wherever he was without bothering to look the part. 2 other men stood behind him in the hallway, silent and watchful. "Elijah," Tiang asked. "Yeah." "Where is she?" Elijah stepped aside. Tiang walked in and stopped 3 feet into the apartment. His eyes found Pamela on the couch immediately. She hadn't moved. Still sitting with her hands folded in her lap, still staring at nothing, still somewhere else entirely. Tiang turned to Elijah. "Tell me what happened." Elijah recounted it. The buzzer. The voice. The things Andrew said through the intercom and then through the door. The way Pamela's hand had moved toward the lock like she was going to let him in. The way she'd walked to the couch and disappeared inside herself. "He said he's staying at the Meridian Hotel," Elijah finished. "Room 412. Tiang's jaw tightened. He looked at the 2 men standing in the hallway. "Find him. Don't touch him. Just find him and keep him there." The men left without a word. Tiang closed the door and locked it. He walked across the living room and knelt in front of Pamela the same way Elijah had 15 minutes earlier. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just positioned himself in her line of sight and waited. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. 30 seconds passed. Then Pamela blinked. Once. Twice. Her eyes focused slowly, like a camera lens adjusting to new light. She saw Tiang kneeling in front of her and her expression didn't change, didn't register surprise or confusion or anything at all. "Miss Thomas," Tiang said quietly, "can you hear me?" Pamela's lips moved, but no sound came out. "I need you to nod if you can hear me." She nodded, barely, just a slight tilt of her head. "Good, I'm going to ask you some questions. You don't have to speak. Just nod or shake your head. Can you do that?" Another nod. "Did he hurt you physically?" She shook her head. "Did he threaten you?" A pause, then a nod. "Did he threaten Elijah?" Another nod, sharper this time. Something flickered across her face, not quite awareness but close. A crack in the ice. Tiang glanced at Elijah. "Go to your room." "I'm not leaving her." "Go to your room. Close the door. Put headphones on. I need to talk to your sister and she can't do that with you here." Elijah looked at Pamela. She still wasn't fully present, but she nodded once more. Elijah hesitated, then walked down the hall. His bedroom door closed with a soft click. "You picked the wrong morning." Tiang shifted from kneeling to sitting on the floor in front of the couch. He leaned back against the coffee table and looked up at Pamela, giving her space, giving her the higher ground. "His name is Andrew," Tiang said. It wasn't a question. Pamela nodded. "You were together." Another nod. "And when you left him, he didn't accept it." This time Pamela's voice came back, thin and hollow. "He never accepts anything he doesn't choose." "How long were you together?" 2 years. "How long have you been free of him?" 3 years, until today." Tiang was quiet for a moment. "What did he do to you, Miss Thomas?" Pamela's hands tightened in her lap. "Nothing you can see." "That's not what I asked." "He didn't hit me. He didn't lock me in rooms. He didn't control my money or my phone or where I went." Her voice was getting stronger now, anger starting to burn through the fog. "He just talked, for hours, days, years, until I couldn't remember which thoughts were mine and which ones he'd planted. Until I apologized for things I didn't do and thanked him for things I didn't want. Until I was so small I could fit inside whatever box he built." And 3 years ago you left. I ran, middle of the night, took Elijah and 2 suitcases and ran. Did he follow you? For 6 months, then he stopped, or I thought he stopped. Pamela looked at Tiang directly now. Fully present, fully back. He was just waiting, watching, letting me think I was free so he could show up and prove I never was. She looked at the leak in the ceiling. Tiang nodded slowly. And now he's here because you've been on television, because you're visible again, because he can't stand that you've built something without him. He said he just wants to talk. He's lying. I know, Pamela's voice cracked. I know, but my hand still moved toward the lock. 3 years. 3 years of therapy I couldn't afford, and nights I couldn't sleep, and mornings I had to remind myself that leaving was the right choice. 3 years, and it took him 5 minutes to make me forget all of it. You didn't open the door. Because Elijah stopped me, not because I was strong enough to stop myself. You were strong enough to stop yourself. Your brother just reminded you. Tiang leaned forward slightly. He doesn't have power over you anymore, Miss Thomas. He has the memory of power, and memories are just ghosts. They can haunt you, but they can't touch you. Pamela laughed. It was a bitter sound, sharp-edged and wrong. You don't understand. You think because you run this restaurant and command these men and solve your problems with violence that you understand control. You don't. You use force. Andrew uses gravity. He doesn't push. He just makes everything tilt toward him until you're falling and can't remember what standing felt like. Then don't stand. Sit, like you're doing right now. I'm not sitting. I'm frozen. No, you're choosing not to move until you know which direction is safe. That's different. I am not something you fix. Pamela stood abruptly. The movement was violent, sudden, like something breaking free. She walked to the window and stared out at the street below. Her hands were shaking now, all the paralysis converting to rage. Why are you here? She asked without turning around. Your brother called. That's not what I'm asking. Why are you in my apartment? Why do you have men watching Andrew? Why do you care? Because you work for me. I'm a hostess. I seat people at tables. That doesn't give you the right to show up at my home and play protector. You're right, it doesn't. Then leave. No. Pamela spun around. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't ask for you to track down my abuser or station your guards or kneel in front of me like I'm something that needs fixing. I told you from the beginning I don't take favors. I told you every favor comes with a price. And now you're here in my home trying to save me from something you don't understand, and I can't. Her voice broke. I can't owe you this. I can't owe you Andrew. That's too much. That's everything. His smile was a leash. Tiang stood slowly. He kept his distance, didn't approach, just faced her across the living room with an expression that was careful and measured and completely unreadable. You think I'm here because I want to own you, he said. I think you're here because you want to clear a debt. What debt? The river, 5 years ago. You think you owe me your life, so now you're trying to repay it by saving mine. That's not. It is. Pamela's voice was rising now, all the fear converting to fury. It's exactly what this is. You couldn't find me for 5 years, so you carried this guilt around like a weight, and now that you finally found me, you're going to fix everything I've broken so you can feel like the ledger's balanced. But I'm not a transaction. I'm not something you repair so you can sleep better at night. I pulled you out of the water because that's what you do when someone's drowning, not because I wanted something. Not because I expected repayment. Because it was the right thing to do, and I was the only one there to do it. I know that. Then why are you here? Because you saved my life, and I'm watching you lose yours to a man who doesn't deserve the power he has over you. And yes, I feel like I owe you. Yes, I've spent 5 years looking for you because I needed to know what kind of person pulls a stranger from a river and walks away. Yes, this is selfish, but it's also true. And the truth is that I have resources you don't have. I have reach you don't have. I can make Andrew disappear before sunrise and you'll never have to think about him again. No. Why not? Every favor comes with a price I didn't agree to pay. Because then you solved my problem and I'm still the person who needed saving. I'm still the victim who couldn't handle her own life. I'm still small. Pamela's hands were fists now. Don't you understand? If you make Andrew go away, he wins. He wins because he was right about me, that I can't survive without someone stronger cleaning up my messes, that I'm too broken to save myself. You're not broken. You don't know that. I do. Tiang took one step forward, just one. I know that because I was the one in the water. I was the one who'd given up, who'd accepted that the river was going to be the last thing I felt. And you dove in anyway, not because I asked, not because you thought I'd repay you, because something in you couldn't walk away from someone drowning. That's not broken, Miss Thomas. That's the opposite of broken. Pamela shook her head. That was different. How? Because you were a stranger. You couldn't hurt me. You couldn't make me small. You couldn't take pieces of me and keep them. And Andrew did. Yes. Then take them back. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Tiang's voice was firm now, not loud but absolute. He took something from you, take it back. But don't let me do it for you. Don't let anyone do it for you. Because you're right. If I make him disappear, you're still the person who needed rescuing. But if you face him yourself and take back what he stole, then you're the person who saved herself, just like you saved me. The woman you knew outgrew you. Pamela stared at him. The rage was still there, burning hot in her chest, but something else was mixing with it now. Not gratitude, not trust, something harder to name, something that felt like recognition. You don't understand what you're asking, she said quietly. Then explain it to me. Andrew doesn't use fists. He uses words. He uses time. He uses the slow erosion of everything you thought you knew about yourself until you can't tell the difference between his voice and yours. You can't fight that with guards or threats or violence. You have to fight it with the one thing he spent years destroying. What's that? Your voice. Your real voice. The one that knows who you are when no one else is in the room. Tiang nodded. Then find it. I don't know if I still have it. You do. I heard it in the diner when you looked at a gun and didn't flinch. I heard it at the Pearl when you corrected my mistake in front of my lieutenants. I heard it 5 years ago when you told me to breathe while I was choking on river water. He paused. It's still there, Miss Thomas. He didn't take it. He just convinced you he did. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Pamela's hands loosened. The shaking stopped. She walked back to the couch and sat down, but this time it wasn't collapse. It was choice. She looked at Tiang across the living room. If I do this, if I face him, I need you to promise me something. What? That you won't interfere, that you won't send your men, that you won't make him disappear or threaten him or solve this for me, no matter what happens, even if I fail. I can't promise that. Then I can't do this. Tiang was quiet for a long moment. If he hurts you. He won't, not physically. That's not how he works. If he threatens Elijah. Then I'll call you, but until that happens, this is mine to handle. Do you understand? Mine. Tiang looked at her the way someone looks at a chess opponent who just moved a piece that changed the entire game. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He nodded once. Then I promise, no interference, no guards, no solutions, this is yours. Pamela stood and extended her hand. Tiang crossed the room and shook it. His grip was firm, his hand still slightly swollen from the bruised knuckles she'd wrapped 4 nights ago. Thank you, she said. For what? For not trying to save me. You don't need saving, Miss Thomas. You just needed to remember that. Tiang walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob and looked back. The Meridian Hotel, room 412. My men will keep their distance, but they'll be in the building, if you change your mind. I won't. He left. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Pamela stood in her living room, breathing in the quiet, feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to settle over her like snow. Elijah emerged from his room. Are you okay? No, Pamela said, but I will be. What are you going to do? She looked at her brother. At the fear in his eyes and the way his hands were still clenched. At 17 years of watching his sister carry weight she never named, but he always felt. I'm going to go talk to Andrew, she said. And I'm going to use the same voice I used to pull a dying man from a river, the one that doesn't ask permission, the one that doesn't apologize for taking up space, the one that knows exactly who I am when no one else is watching. When? Tomorrow, on my terms, in a public place where he can't turn me into something small. Elijah nodded. He didn't argue, didn't offer to come with her, just trusted that his sister knew what she was doing even though she wasn't sure she did. Pamela walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Andrew was in a hotel room thinking he'd won, thinking 5 minutes at her door had proven she was still his, still small, still the girl he'd taken apart piece by piece. He was wrong. She sat across from a stranger who was too broken to ask for help. Tomorrow she'd prove it. Tomorrow she'd walk into that hotel and face the voice that had haunted her for 3 years. Tomorrow she'd take back the pieces he stole. And if she broke in the process, at least she'd break on her own terms. Pamela was getting dressed for the confrontation when her phone rang. It was Monday, 10 in the morning. She'd taken the day off from the Pearl without explanation because some battles required your full attention and she couldn't afford to be distracted by seating charts and wine lists. She'd planned to meet Andrew at noon in the lobby of the Meridian Hotel. Public, cameras, witnesses, a place where his voice couldn't expand to fill all the available space. But the caller ID said Jefferson High School, and Pamela's hands stopped halfway through buttoning her shirt. She answered, "Hello. Miss Thomas, this is Principal Hayes at Jefferson High. I'm calling about your brother." Pamela's stomach dropped. What happened? "He's fine. He's in my office now. But there was an incident this morning outside the building. A man approached Elijah in the parking lot. The man claimed to be a family friend. When Elijah tried to walk away, the man followed him. Our security guard intervened before anything escalated, but Elijah is quite shaken." What did this man look like? Tall, early 30s, brown hair. The guard said he was very well-spoken, almost apologetic, but persistent. Andrew didn't knock. He leaned on the buzzer. Pamela's hand tightened on the phone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up and finished dressing in violent motions, yanking the shirt on, pulling on her jacket, shoving her feet into shoes. The plan had been to face Andrew on her terms, in her time, in a place she controlled. But Andrew had just rewritten the rules the way he always did, by going after the one thing she couldn't protect from a distance. Elijah. She grabbed her keys and her phone and was halfway out the door when she stopped. She pulled up Tiang's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. One press and he'd send his men. One word and Andrew would disappear before the sun set. "No interference. No guards, no solutions. This is yours." Pamela put the phone away and left. The bus ride to Jefferson High took 35 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour. Pamela sat in the back row with her hands folded in her lap, breathing in measured counts, trying to keep the rage from consuming all the oxygen in her lungs. Andrew had gone after Elijah, had waited outside his school, had proven that no distance was safe, no boundary was real, no amount of running would ever be enough. She looked at the gun like a leak in the ceiling. The school was a sprawling brick building that looked like every other public high school in the city, tired, underfunded, doing its best with too little. Pamela walked through the main entrance and showed her ID to the security guard at the desk. He called the principal's office and directed her to the second floor. Principal Hayes was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the exhausted expression of someone who'd spent decades trying to keep teenagers alive long enough to graduate. She met Pamela at the office door. "Miss Thomas, thank you for coming so quickly. Where's my brother?" "Inside. He's upset but unharmed." Principal Hayes lowered her voice. "The man who approached him didn't make any explicit threats. He just kept saying he needed to speak with you, that it was urgent, that Elijah could help facilitate a conversation. When Elijah refused, the man became more insistent. That's when our guard stepped in." "Is the man still here?" "No, he left when security approached, but he did leave this." Principal Hayes held out a folded piece of paper. "He asked Elijah to give it to you." Pamela took the paper. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was Andrew's, Precise, careful, the kind of penmanship that looked like it belonged on wedding invitations or sympathy cards. Pam, I tried talking to you directly. You wouldn't listen. I tried being patient. You wouldn't respond. So now I'm leaving you a choice. Meet me at Riverside Park, the north entrance, today at 2 p.m. Come alone. If you don't show, I'll be back at Elijah's school tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. You can't run from this conversation forever. A. His smile was a leash. Pamela folded the note and put it in her pocket. Can I see my brother? Principal Hayes opened the office door. Elijah sat in a chair against the wall, his backpack at his feet, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked up when Pamela walked in and something in his face cracked, not quite relief, not quite shame, something in between. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't tell him anything, I swear I didn't. I know, Pamela knelt in front of him. Are you okay? He knew my schedule. He knew which door I use. He knew my chess club meets on Mondays. Elijah's voice was shaking. How does he know that? Because he's been watching, probably for weeks. Pamela put her hand on her brother's knee. But he's not going to do that anymore. How are you going to stop him? By giving him what he wants, a conversation. Pam, no. Elijah, look at me. Pamela waited until her brother met her eyes. I'm going to handle this, today, and when I'm done, he's never going to come near you again. Do you trust me? Elijah nodded slowly. Good, you're going home. Right now, take a car service. I'll pay for it, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. Understand? What about you? I have an appointment to keep. You picked the wrong morning. Riverside Park sat on the eastern edge of the city, where the water met concrete, and the illusion of nature fought a losing battle against urban sprawl. The north entrance was a rusted gate that opened onto a path lined with bare trees and benches that hadn't been maintained since the previous administration. This time of day, 2 in the afternoon on a Monday, the park was nearly empty. A jogger passed Pamela on the path, a man walking a dog. No one who would stay, no one who would witness. Andrew had chosen well. Pamela found him sitting on a bench near the water. He looked exactly the same. Tall, handsome in the way that made people trust him on sight, brown hair that fell across his forehead just so, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than her rent and jeans that fit like they'd been tailored. He smiled when he saw her approaching. The smile was warm, genuine, the kind that made you forget for half a second what he was capable of. Pam, I'm glad you came. Pamela stopped 10 feet from the bench, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that he'd have to stand to reach her. You went to Elijah's school. I needed to get your attention. You had my attention when you showed up at my apartment. Did I? Because you wouldn't open the door. You wouldn't talk to me. You sent your little brother to tell me to leave like I was some stranger bothering you on the street. Andrew stood. The movement was slow, non-threatening, hands visible. I'm not a stranger, Pam. We were together for 2 years. That means something. That deserves more than a closed door. What it deserves is respect. I said no. That should have been enough. But it's not about what you said, it's about what you meant. Andrew took 1 step closer. You're scared, I understand that. I hurt you when you left and you're afraid I'll hurt you again. But I've changed. I've been working on myself, therapy, meditation, all the things you used to beg me to try. And I realize now that I was the problem, that I pushed you too hard, expected too much, made you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is you were always more than enough. The woman you knew outgrew you. Pamela didn't move. You're lying. I'm not. You're lying the way you always lie, with truth. You probably did go to therapy. You probably did meditate. Because that's what you do. You find the right words and the right tools and you use them to build better cages. You think I don't recognize this? The humility, the self-awareness, the way you're standing there being so reasonable and apologetic like you're the one who's been wronged. I've heard this speech before, Andrew. You delivered it the last time I tried to leave, and the time before that. Andrew's smile faltered, just slightly. That's not fair. Fair doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you went to my brother's school and proved you haven't changed at all. You're still the man who thinks boundaries are suggestions, who thinks no means convince me harder, who thinks 3 years of silence can be erased with 1 conversation. I just want closure. Then close it yourself. I'm not responsible for your peace. We were in love. No, you were in control. I was in survival. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. Andrew's expression shifted. The warmth drained. The smile disappeared. What replaced it was something colder, sharper, something he usually kept hidden beneath layers of charm. You think you've outgrown me. I know I have. Because you work at some fancy restaurant now. Because you stood up to a robber and people think you're brave. Because some gangster gave you a job and you've convinced yourself you're independent. Andrew laughed. It was a cruel sound. You're the same person you were 3 years ago, Pam. Still broken. Still needing someone to tell you you're worth something. You just traded me for a different man. I didn't trade you for anyone. I left you because staying was killing me. And look how well that worked out. You're one bad day away from losing your apartment. Your brother's walking around terrified someone's going to hurt him. You're so isolated you don't have a single friend to call when things get hard. You think that's growth? You think that's freedom? You're just alone. And being alone isn't the same as being strong. Every favor comes with a price. I didn't agree to pay. Pamela felt the words land, felt them try to root, felt them searching for the soil Andrew had spent 2 years tilling inside her mind. But the soil was different now. Harder, less hospitable. 3 years of growing in a direction he couldn't reach had changed the landscape. You're right, she said. Andrew blinked. What? I am isolated. I do struggle. Some days I wake up and don't know if I can keep going. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding on. Pamela took a step forward. But that's still better than the version of me you built. The one who apologized for breathing too loud, who asked permission to have thoughts, who thanked you for the privilege of being slowly taken apart. That version is dead, Andrew. I killed her the night I left. And no matter how many times you show up, no matter how many speeches you give about closure or change or how much you've grown, you can't bring her back. You're making a mistake. I've made lots of mistakes. Staying with you was one. Believing I needed you was another. Thinking I had to explain myself to you right now is a third. Pamela's voice was steady, flat, the same voice she'd used on the robber, but this time it was hers completely. You don't get to rewrite what happened between us. You don't get to make yourself the victim. And you don't get to use my brother to force a conversation I don't want to have. Andrew's hands curled into fists. I could make things very difficult for you. You already are. I could go back to that school every day. I could follow you. I could make sure everyone you work with knows exactly who you are, what you came from, how broken you were when I found you. Do it. Tell them. See if any of it changes the fact that I'm not yours anymore. I am not something you fix. Andrew stared at her. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain, lost, like someone had just changed the rules to a game he'd spent years mastering. You'll regret this, he said. Maybe, but it'll be my regret, not yours. You think you're so strong now, so independent, but you're going to fail, Pam. You're going to fall. And when you do, don't call me, don't show up at my door, don't ask for help, because I won't be there. Good, that's exactly what I want. Pamela turned and walked away. She didn't run, didn't rush, just walked at the same steady pace she'd used to approach, her shoulders level, her breathing even. Behind her, she heard Andrew call her name. Once, twice, she didn't turn around. She walked out of the park and onto the street and kept walking until she couldn't hear him anymore. Then she stopped at a bus stop and sat on the bench and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, from the effort of holding herself together while taking herself apart in front of the man who'd spent 2 years teaching her how to be small. She'd done it. She'd faced him. She'd used her voice, the real one, the one that knew who she was, and she'd walked away. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tiang. Are you all right? Pamela stared at the message. She'd told him not to interfere, told him this was hers to handle, and he'd kept his promise. But he'd been watching anyway, probably through his men, probably from a distance that wouldn't violate their agreement but would let him step in if things went wrong. She typed, I'm fine, it's done. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, I'm proud of you. Pamela read the words 3 times. Then she put her phone away and sat at the bus stop watching traffic pass. The sky was gray. The air smelled like rain that hadn't decided whether to fall yet. The city moved around her in its usual rhythm, indifferent to whether she just won or lost or survived. But she'd survived. She'd faced Andrew and used the voice he'd spent years trying to erase. And when she stood up to catch her bus home, she stood a little straighter than she had that morning. The cage was still there. She could still feel its outline, but the door was open now. And for the first time in 3 years, Pamela believed she might actually know how to walk through it. Behind her, in Riverside Park, Andrew sat on the bench and stared at the water. He'd lost. He knew it, could feel it in the way she'd walked away without flinching, without apologizing, without giving him the power he'd always been able to take. But men like Andrew didn't lose gracefully. They lost quietly, and they waited, and they remembered. And someday, when the woman who'd beaten them wasn't looking, they'd try one more time to prove they'd been right all along. For now, though, Pamela had won, and that would have to be enough. Tiang was waiting outside her apartment when Pamela got home. He sat on the 3rd floor, landing with his back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of him, wearing the same dark jeans and plain shirt from 2 days ago. No suit, no polish, just a man who looked like he'd been sitting there long enough to memorize the pattern in the hallway carpet. Pamela stopped at the top of the stairs. "How long have you been here?" "An hour, maybe 2. "You could have called." "I didn't want to interrupt." Tiang stood slowly, stiffly, like he'd forgotten movement required planning. "I wanted to make sure you made it home." "I texted you. I said I was fine." "I know. I wanted to see it for myself." Pamela looked at him standing in her hallway, this man who ran restaurants and commanded loyalty and solved problems with his knuckles when words stopped working. He looked exhausted, not physically, something deeper. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "Come in," she said. She unlocked the door. Elijah was on the couch doing homework with headphones on, his shoulders tense even with music in his ears. He looked up when Pamela walked in and pulled the headphones down around his neck. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm okay," Pamela gestured at Tiang behind her. "This is my boss, he's just checking in." Elijah studied Tiang with the careful assessment of someone who'd learned to read danger before it announced itself. "You're the one who came the other night." "I am." "You helped." "I tried." Elijah nodded once, then put his headphones back on and returned to his homework. The conversation was over. Permission granted. Tiang stepped inside and Pamela closed the door behind him. His hand was shaking. Pamela noticed that first. The apartment was quiet except for whatever music was leaking from Elijah's headphones. Pamela walked to the kitchen and started making coffee without asking if Tiang wanted any. The ritual was automatic. Water in the machine. Filter. Grounds. Press the button. Wait for the familiar hiss and drip. Tiang stood in the living room like someone who'd forgotten how to exist in small spaces. His eyes moved across the apartment, the second-hand furniture, the cracked ceiling, the window that didn't close all the way. Not judging, just cataloging. "Sit," Pamela said. He sat at the kitchen table. She poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them over, setting one in front of him and keeping one for herself. Black. No sugar. The way she'd learned he took it during late nights at the Pearl when the restaurant was closed and the only people left were the ones who couldn't go home yet. "You went alone," Tiang said. "I did. My men said he tried to follow you when you left the park." "He did, for about a block, then he gave up. He's leaving the city. Checked out of the Meridian 2 hours ago, heading south. My people will make sure he keeps going." Pamela looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. "I thought you promised not to interfere." "I promised not to interfere with the confrontation. I didn't promise to let him come back." Tiang's voice was calm, factual. "He won't bother you again. If he tries, I'll know before he gets within 100 miles of this city." "That's still interference." "That's insurance. There's a difference." "You picked the wrong morning." Pamela set down her cup. "Why are you really here, Mr. Sun?" I wanted to make sure you were all right. You already did that with your text. You're here for a different reason. Tiang was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup like he was trying to absorb its heat. I wanted to tell you that what you did today was extraordinary. It was necessary. That's different. You faced the person who'd taken pieces of you and you took them back. Without help, without weapons, just your voice. That's not just necessary, that's courage. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like survival. Sometimes those are the same thing. Pamela studied him across the table. The exhaustion was clearer now. Not physical fatigue, something older. Something that lived in the space behind his eyes where the water and the bridge and the woman who pulled him out still existed 5 years later. You're here because of the river, she said. I'm here because... Don't lie, not to me, not after today. You're here because 5 years ago I pulled you out of the water and you've spent every day since carrying that like a debt you can't repay. And watching me face Andrew made it worse because now you think you owe me even more. That you should have done more, been more, fixed more. She looked at the gun like a leak in the ceiling. Tiang's jaw tightened. I don't think I owe you more. I know I can never repay what you gave me. I didn't give you anything. I just didn't let you die. You gave me my life back. No, I gave you another chance at your life. What you did with it was yours. And what I want to do with it now is make sure the woman who saved it doesn't lose hers to people who don't deserve the power they have over her. That's not your responsibility. Maybe not, but it's my choice. Pamela leaned back in her chair. The coffee had gone lukewarm. She didn't drink it. Just held it and watched Tiang and tried to decide if the man sitting across from her was offering her a cage or something else entirely. 5 years ago, she said slowly, when I pulled you out of that water, did you see my face? Yes. What did you see? Tiang frowned. I don't understand the question. When you looked at me, what did you see? A hero, a savior, someone brave. I saw someone who didn't hesitate, who didn't calculate the cost before jumping, who just acted because acting was the only answer that made sense. And now, what do you see when you look at me? Every favor comes with a price I didn't agree to pay. Tiang set down his coffee. He looked at Pamela directly, and for the first time since she'd met him, the careful mask slipped completely. What was underneath wasn't soft or vulnerable. It was honest. I see someone who carries more weight than anyone should have to carry alone, who built walls so high she can't remember what it feels like to let someone stand next to her instead of across from her, who saved my life and then disappeared because she didn't want anything in return, not even gratitude. He paused. And I see someone who terrifies me because she's the only person I've ever met who looks at me and doesn't see power or danger or opportunity. She just sees a man who needed help. That's why I'm here, Miss Thomas. Not because I owe you. Because you're the only person in 5 years who's treated me like I was worth saving instead of worth using. Silence filled the kitchen. Elijah's music had stopped. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Maybe he was listening. Pamela didn't look to check. I don't know how to let people stay, she said quietly. I know. Andrew taught me that staying meant losing pieces of myself I couldn't get back. That proximity was just another word for erosion. I know that too. So if you stay, if I let you stay, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to trust that you won't become another person who takes more than they give. She treated him like he was a person, not a man on the edge of something terrible. Tiang nodded slowly. Then we figure it out together. No debts, no favors, no ledgers, just two people who understand what it's like to almost drown and what it means to have someone pull you back. That's not equal. You still think you owe me. Then let me think that. Let me carry my gratitude the way you carry your caution. We don't have to balance perfectly to stand next to each other. Pamela looked into her coffee cup. The liquid had filmed over with a thin layer of oil. She needed to wash the pot better. Add that to the list of things she'd fix when she had time. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay. I took this job because I was desperate, because my rent was due and my brother needed lunch money and I couldn't see another way forward. Not because I wanted to repay a debt I didn't remember owing. Not because I thought you were different from other men who offer things that feel like gifts until you realize they're hooks. I know that. And I stayed because the money was good, and the work was honest, and you didn't try to own me the way I expected you to. I know that too. But somewhere between wrapping your hand and correcting your seating chart and watching you sit in this hallway waiting to make sure I was okay, something shifted. And I don't know what to call it. I don't know if it's trust or just exhaustion or some kind of Stockholm syndrome where I've convinced myself the cage is different when it's just bigger. I am not something you fix. Tiang leaned forward. What do you want it to be? I don't know. Then what do you know? Pamela met his eyes. I know that when Andrew showed up at my door, my first instinct was to call you. I know that when I faced him in that park, part of me was stronger because I knew you were somewhere watching. I know that right now, sitting in my kitchen at 9 o'clock at night drinking bad coffee, I'm not afraid you're going to try to take something from me. And that terrifies me more than Andrew ever did. Why? Because fear I understand. Safety I don't. Tiang reached across the table. He didn't take her hand, just placed his palm flat on the surface between them and offering an invitation. Then learn, take your time, build it slow, but don't walk away from something that might be good just because you're afraid it'll turn bad. You're stronger than that, Miss Thomas. You proved it today. Pamela looked at his hand on the table, at the bruised knuckles that had healed wrong because he hadn't iced them for the full 20 minutes, at the scar across his thumb from something she'd never asked about, at the steadiness of his fingers, no tremor, no uncertainty. She placed her hand next to his, not touching, just close. I'm not ready to call this anything yet, she said. That's fine. I'm not ready to owe you, or be owed or figure out what debt means when it's wrapped in something that looks like care. That's fine too. But I'm also not ready to ask you to leave. So if you want to stay, not as my boss, not as the man I saved, just as someone who sits in my kitchen and drinks bad coffee and doesn't expect me to be anything other than what I am, you can. The woman you knew outgrew you. Tiang's mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, something quieter. I can live with that. Good, because that's all I'm offering. No promises, no definitions, just coffee and honesty and the possibility that maybe, eventually, I'll figure out how to let someone stand next to me without feeling like I'm losing ground. That's more than enough. They sat in the kitchen as the night deepened outside. Elijah had definitely fallen asleep on the couch. The city hummed beyond the windows, and two people who'd both almost drowned in different waters sat across from each other and didn't talk about debt or gratitude or what they owed. They just drank coffee and existed in the same space and called it progress. Later, when Tiang stood to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Thomas, you were wrong about one thing. What's that? You do know how to let people stay. You just spent 3 years teaching yourself not to. That's going to take time to unlearn, but you'll get there. How do you know? Because you jumped into a river for a stranger. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you are when you're not trying to protect yourself. He left, the door closed, and Pamela stood in her apartment feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. She'd faced Andrew. She'd reclaimed her voice. She'd let Tiang sit in her kitchen and offer her something without demanding payment. She sat across from a stranger who was too broken to ask for help. Tomorrow she'd go back to the Pearl. She'd seat guests and manage the floor and correct Tiang when he made mistakes. She'd cash her paycheck and pay her rent and make sure Elijah had lunch money for the week. And maybe, eventually, she'd figure out how to stand next to someone without building walls first. But tonight, she'd just survived, and survival was enough. It had always been enough. She walked to the couch and draped a blanket over Elijah. He stirred, but didn't wake. She turned off the lights and went to her own room and lay in the dark, thinking about rivers and bridges, and the difference between being saved and choosing to let someone stay. The cage was still there. It would probably always be there, but the door was open now. And for the first time in 5 years, Pamela thought she might actually walk through it.